If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Lore by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we continue the Lore by Night How to Wraith series, a mini-series that aims to improve the role-playing of players and storytellers during tabletop sessions. This episode will focus on the role-playing of the Shadow. The last couple of episodes in this mini-series have focused almost exclusively on the psyche, the Wraith proper, one could say, but that is only one half of the story. I'm of course talking about the Shadow, the spectral imp on the shoulder of every Wraith, hell-bent on the self-destruction of the Wraith. It will bribe, cajole, threaten and take control of the Wraith psyche to follow through with its selfish, seductive and sadistic goal to pull the Wraith into Oblivion, through catharsis, the special abilities known as Forms, Shadow Dice, and, most deadly of all, honeyed words coated in venom. The Shadow is a deeply nuanced and integral part of Wraith that not only allows a safe and productive space to project in and out of game snark, but explores deeper and darker emotions not found in other role-playing games, which can be rather cathartic. Pun intended. There has been much discussion across many Wraith the Oblivion books about this, but many of them are hard to come by, and due to the reputation that Wraith is supposedly an unplayable mess, a lot of people not going to go out of their way to acquire what is otherwise gothic fiction. Fortunately, your Lord and Saviour here is going to info-dump a special interest at you for more than 10 minutes, so hopefully most of it will be useful for the budding Wraith player and storyteller. One of the more interesting things about the Shadow in Wraith is that, whilst it is very difficult to explain what exactly the Shadow is, it is rather straightforward to define what it isn't, and by extension, what a Shadow, someone who roleplays the shadow of another player, the psyche, shouldn't do. To the uninitiated, the Shadow seems like a ghostly bully mechanic, but as we discussed previously, this is quite frankly a load of bollocks. The Shadow, I believe, are the darkest urges and desires within manifest. It is the parts of you that you wish were not true and try to blot out, now in a more recognizable and louder form, tempting you to live them out, liberating you from the once moral shackles of mortal consequence. I apologize for the direct comparisons I am making to Persona 4, as that is purely coincidental, but it is also a good template to visualize what a Shadow could be. It mocks and berates you, trying to make you come to terms with what you are, what you really are, as well as twisting your emotions and frustrations into reality, not satisfied with the psyche failing, but to suffer with it too. And that is not enough for the Shadow, for the psyche has to come to terms that most not only rely on the Shadow to get things done, but the psyche needs the Shadow, gaslighting them into forced comfort. And if the psyche lashes out, well, it's the Shadow's job to put it back in place. And I do want to highlight that I have no point to describe the Shadow as evil. Sure, the individual psyche may refer to their Shadow as evil for some of the things it does, but the Shadow is far too morally complex to simply be defined as good or evil. The Shadow, in my opinion, is the part of you that wants to fail, the self-deprecating and doubting voices in your head, forever be damned for the pain, hurt, and regret they have to endure, prolonging and magnifying their damned existence. It feeds off these darker emotions, strengthening them and reinforcing them, legitimizing them, and all the pain that comes with it. How it does all of this is dependent on the archetype you select during character creation, but whatever happens, the Shadow shouldn't be portrayed like a Saturday morning mustache-twirling cartoon villain when a plan goes awry, for the conflict between the Shadow and Psyche is a war of attrition, and the Shadow will eventually win. The Shadow shouldn't be ignored because you don't like losing control or being influenced like that. If that sounds like you, play something else. Of course, in order to do any of that, you have to physically design the Shadow. Not going to go through the mechanical rules of that here, for I already did that a couple of years ago. I have seen 3 ways that Shadows are created. I see plenty of people insist the ST designs the Shadow for the player, and I'm not of this mindset. It should be the player that defines the core of their characters. This leads to the other 2 methods, that it's just the player, or the player and the Shadow Guide work together, bouncing ideas to and forth, offering different perspectives that one mind may miss. Whatever the method and whoever is involved, here is what I would suggest. Starting with the archetype, consider this the emotional darkness that underlines the Wraith. Remember, the shadow is a part of the psyche. It is not a separate entity all by itself, so whilst you could be the classic inversing the psyche to create the shadow, what about the psyche does that represent? The shadow should not be a hide to Dr. Jekyll. This archetype should be connected. What is the biggest telling flaw? What do they have that the chosen regret written on their character sheet? What selfish and or self-serving desire would get the psyche and shadow working together for a brief period? A shadow that works with the psyche, on occasion, can prove to be helpful and useful to the psyche, luring them into a false sense of security before pulling the rug from beneath them. To use an example to contextualize this, let's use Faye, the cheekily carefree latte artist from last time. Despite the value the human race places upon arts and coffee, Western society tends to have very low opinions on both artists and people who serve and prepare food. Let us say that Faye isn't celebrated by her parents, that she was the disappointing child who refused to be like her siblings and get a proper job. What if this nagging persistence has been a present feature in Faye's life? It would make sense given what I described her as carefree, too boisterous, not feminine enough, those sorts of things. She may have loved her job, her friend's life, and what she was earning, but there was always that little voice at the back of her head that sounded like her mother, telling her that she's a colossal fuck-up. She could be earning so much more, that the place she worked was too rough, dangerous, etc. And look at that! She was right. Now Faye's dead, and this sliver of regret, not listening to mother, serves as a strong desire to be looked after and approved of, all with a gentle guiding hand to protect her when things become just a little bit too dangerous. But all on all Faye's terms, of course. Sounds like the parent archetype now, doesn't it? Well, perhaps not that last part after all. Mothers knows best after all. In this scenario, Faye's shadow guide could play into this guilt more, punishing her whenever the shadow is offended by anything it perceives as hurtful and punishes all the mistakes in between. Whereas Faye would try to be confident in new people she meets, putting her best foot forward with every exciting opportunity, the parent here would do the inverse, isolating her from any community, enforcing Faye's insecurities and loneliness, making Faye rely more on the shadow, the one true constant in her life. In short, where Faye would draw strength, the shadow uses those to make her weak. The two remaining features are the dark passions and fawns, the latter being integral to the shadow, just as passions are for the psyche. Yes, mechanically it serves as the fuel for their angst, but let us think again on what this represents. This is a part of you, satisfying itself in the darker elements that you pretend that do not exist, but things that you do and are a part of you, you revel in. One easy solution is to reverse an existent passion. The passion of protect my family becomes the dark passion of torment or even kill my family. What would that say about the psyche? That you love them but you probably hate them too, or are you just kidding yourself? Note that I did not state the emotions just now. You would assume kill my family might be hate, but what if it is now love or relief? There have been many people who have killed the people they love for all sorts of twisted reasons, or at least thought about killing people. Remember, you don't have to be a good person or one with nice thoughts to be a Wraith, but what if you had kill my family as a regular passion? You could have protect my family as a dark passion, but what about neglect or forget my family? In life, you are obsessed over the destruction of your family, but the shadow would torture you by putting obstacles in your way not to pursue that. Whatever you decide, dark passions shouldn't be greater in value than their reversed passion, by which I mean the passion dots shouldn't be higher than the dark passions to begin with. At least circumstances may change during play to reflect the strength of the shadow, the psyche, as well as the NPCs or items in place. The psyche should always be the dominant force at the beginning of the first session. A dark passion could be adjacent to the character concept, but not connected to a theta or a passion. For example, Faye could use Moliate to express their artistic vision in the underworld, wanting to create the best pieces they can, modelling any plasmics and Wraith they are willing to trust to sculpt their anything. A dark passion for this could be destroy all that I create, which could represent a moment in her artistic career, or, to link it back to the parent archetype, her mother's disapproval of her art. in life. The dark passion would be something that, when looked at with a disapproving outsider's eye, is seemingly random. An example Wraith 20 gives is dive into a nihil, self-hatred, on page 213 as an example, but there are many ways one could make that work rather than trying to fit out the darts. Self-hatred is a fucking dark emotion. Perhaps with Faye, she wasn't truly happy with her work, just wearing a smile. Maybe she tried or at least thought about killing herself or self-harming. Jumping into a nihil is a borderline suicidal move. How could you link this to the parent archetype in our example? Remember that the ultimate goal of the shadow is, by going through a nihil, chances are you're going to get torn up by spectres and spat out as one. These good, better people understand and will keep you safe. None of the circle ever understood you or any of your contacts and allies. You have come home. Faye returning home to her mother would also be the ultimate defeat, that she couldn't look after herself, trapped once and probably forevermore. Now, this may not be an attempt to end it all, but it may be something to give a depressed Faye a rush of adrenaline, some emotion, anything to feel remotely alive. With an alternate emotion, she may regret being so carefree, wearing a different sort of mask. You may think that without direct intervention via Thorns, Shadow Dice or Catharsis, it would be pretty difficult to get the Wraith to comply in acting out the dark passions. Again, this should come through subtly, of course. You shouldn't nag, bitch or whine, but strategize how to get the psyche to act following its dark passion so it seems like it's in their best interest. Protecting your family may involve working towards a dark passion or hurt someone who hurts my family, for example. Outside of this, you would be surprised to see how often players would inadvertently act towards dark passions without any intervention because they are role-playing their character. A game I ran earlier this year, 2024, involved a new Wraith attempting to use puppetry to cause a mugger trip over. They botched their role, which caused the mugger's limbs to spasm and die horribly, spreading fear to nearer passers-by. The Shadow then attempted to gain more angst as the dark passion of spread fear where you go had been achieved. Even without the botch, I would have accepted it, for someone losing autonomy just for a moment is enough to make anyone scared. The more supernatural Thorns may feel like some dark powers to give the Shadow Guide something meaningful to do, but consider the ghosts are supernatural beings, and if the psyche has some toys that, initially, represent their emotional core, the Shadow, which also represents the Wraith, has more manipulative powers. The Thorns that, like the actual spirit plant bit of the same name, won't kill you, but will hurt and is difficult to remove fully from you. Shit can infect you too if you don't treat it right. Many of the forms are not subtle, unlike the rest of the Shadow, but that's like any abuser, isn't it? They have their peaks, but rein in once they have their victims under their control. In terms of character creation, try to consider what different Thorns would represent the Shadow and their relationship to the psyche. Something like Pact of Doom may represent a big risk they took, or foolish decision they would change their life for the worse. Trick of the Light and Mirror Mirror are classic for characters who lack responsibility and or hate their look, or maybe have a skewed look on the world due to their upbringing, substance abuse, or are just incredibly depressed. They could have been incredibly paranoid or fearful for one reason or another. Those examples are just knee-jerk reactions as I write this script, so one could be a lot more creative. The storyteller should also give a reason as to how Thorns come into being and new ones manifest, as none of the Wraith books properly address this. The manifestation of Thorns could occur accidentally or at the discretion of the storyteller, potentially leading to awkward moments for the Wraith. Alternatively, the process could be gradual, with the Shadow only gaining enough understanding of its powers to use them one at a time. The storyteller might also choose to let the Shadow Guide have full access to all abilities from the start, allowing immediate use of the entire repertoire to torment the psyche. If the Thorns manifest at the storyteller's discretion, it opens up numerous role-playing opportunities for the Shadow Guide. These can range from the obvious Did I do that? Just a practical, how did I just do that and can I do it again? There's also the potential for uncertainty, bluffing the psyche with unrevealed powers and even the shadow being unsettled by its unleashed abilities. Moreover, a fawn could awaken a desire for more power within the shadow's innermost thoughts. Realizing its current capabilities, the shadow might even crave a greater power and seek to manipulate the psyche into situations where it can learn and grow stronger. When you begin playing the Shadow Guide, there is certainly a lot to consider. The Shadow could be as confused as the Wraith, which I feel is partly true. The Shadow's a part of you and naturally learns about the Shadow Guide as it does. Just as the Psyche learns about its Arcanoi, so too does the Shadow and its Fawns and everything else it can do. You can make it as hopefully lost as the Psyche, which certainly would be an interesting experience. On the flip side, the Shadow may know more about the Shadowlands, and they are the ones to explain everything to the Psyche, making the Psyche more reliant on the Shadow, leaving ample opportunity for abuse and lies, misleading the poor soul with a wild ride without seatbelts. Whatever the choice of approach, whatever the first words of the Shadow would be traumatic, letting the Wraith know they'll never be alone again. What a curious statement that is. As it learns what the Psyche can do, it will work out the weak spots as well, or rather, learn of even more. This is important to note if you are starting a Wraith game from the moment of death, or rather, awakening in the Shadowlands. But what does the Shadow want in all of this, beyond the obvious? Think about the archetype and how that manifests within the Psyche. Ask yourself just who the Shadow is, taking the whole character sheet with you. Does it bring up the past like a stuck record, or is it solely focused on new failures? Maybe it has a different voice which, like our poor Fae, could be additionally traumatic. Do you think the Shadow wants the Psyche to acknowledge the Shadow was ultimately right before embracing Oblivion? Is it attempting to eradicate everything the Psyche holds dear, leading the Wraith to willingly embrace Oblivion? Is it aiming to isolate the Wraith by driving away everyone else in its circle, leaving the Wraith with no alternative but to turn to the Shadow or just playing things by ear? The ultimate goal of Oblivion remained the same, but the chosen path to achieve it holds the utmost importance. Understanding that the Shadow has objectives and conceivably a plan, and approaching from that standpoint and mindset bestows the Shadow with personality and direction. This presents numerous opportunities for the Shadow Guides to engage in immersive role-playing, recognizing that the Shadow is not solely about succumbing to the nearest spectre significantly enriches the enjoyment and depth of Shadow Guiding for both the Shadow Guide and the player. The Shadow has also its hard lines it won't cross, which is dependent on the Shadow in question. It's also okay not to have all or most of these questions answered, those that conform during play of course. Injecting play as someone's Shadow Guide has no handwritten rule, so players, particularly new ones, may struggle to work out when to butt in, but that is the thing. You insert yourself as the Shadow Guide whenever you please. But what are your options and how should you go about it? Well, physically, there should be some sort of prop or different way of speaking so everyone knows who is speaking, your Psyche or someone else's Shadow, even as simple as face Shadow I will ... To be honest, what I could present to you now would be endless, as there are many ways of lying, building up doubt, false hope through words, fawns and over-reliance on Shadow dice, taking them away when the Psyche needs them the most. There's also the conversation regarding harrowings, which I strongly urge you to go and read the Shadow Player's Guide and Wraith the Oblivion First Edition, both of which you can purchase with the affiliate link in the description below to further support the channel. They are incredibly valuable resources for understanding and playing harrowings, and just like the Shadow, is terribly conceptual and subjective. There are not many ways to incorrectly play a Shadow, but there are lots of ways to do it right. Wraiths can be just as or even more corrupt than the humans they watch over and once were, and will always be conflict with something they claim as a bigger villain. Regardless of the individual, the Shadow wants its Psyche to fail. Now, to conclude properly, I wish to state two things. First of all, everything I've just presented to you is my own opinion. At the end of the day, you can do whatever you want to do. As long as everyone is having fun and feeling that political horror, you are interpreting everything correctly. The other thing I wish to reinforce is that I have only presented a mere portion of my knowledge and power and takes on tonight's topics. Why should I give you all my secrets? Trick question, I fucking wouldn't. I can reveal, however, that all my knowledge comes from the books, so go and read them if you want to learn more. Again, it is not needed to enjoy the game, but if you want to develop your character concept within the grander lore and beyond, go and legally purchase the books and read and enjoy them thoroughly. To be kept updated, follow the Lore by Night VTM Instagram and Blue Sky pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.